Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us again this evening for the last of our 4 sessions for Church in the Age of COVID. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the work of Heidi Campbell with a particular focus on a call to creative leadership. Very quickly to go over the ground that we've covered, in case someone's joining us for the first time, you might want to go back and look at the other sessions that we've done. We started off with a call to imagination and looking at the work of Walter Brueggemann, in particular his book, Virus as a Summons to Faith. In session 2, we looked at N.T. Wright's God in the Pandemic and talked about a call to faithing. Yes, faithing. We made up words for this. And then last week, we looked at a call to solidarity in the work of Slavoj Zizek in his book, Pandemic, COVID-19 Shakes the World. And most people came back, so that's a good sign. So tonight, Joanne is going to be our leader, and I'm going to be in the background, just checking the chat and those kinds of things. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Joanne.
Thank you, Robert. The last couple of weeks, we've had people asking towards the end about prayer. In this week, because tomorrow begins the electoral synod for the Diocese of Eastern Newfoundland and Labrador, and Monday is the consecration of the Reverend Sandra Fife to be as Bishop of the Diocese of Nova Scotia PEI, no, my diocese. Sandra has been part of our group for a couple of weeks. So I thought perhaps this week we would start with prayer for them. So that way, if we get carried away in discussion and argument, we won't forget. So today we're going to start for prayer. The Lord be with you. Gracious God, we pray today for all those who are called into positions of leadership. We ask that you would give them the creativity and imagination they need for the times ahead. We pray for the Diocese of Eastern Newfoundland and Labrador, excuse me, as they gather together this weekend to choose a new bishop, someone to lead them in the years to come. Pray that they will open themselves up to the leading of your Spirit, and that the person they choose may be given the gifts they need. We pray as well for the Diocese of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island as they prepare to consecrate Sandra Fife as bishop on Monday. We pray that you will be with them as they enter into this challenging time and have a consecration under very different circumstances than they had hoped and they had planned. Pray your blessing upon her as she becomes bishop and upon the diocese, that your Holy Spirit will inspire them and give them as well the gifts they need for the time we are in. We ask this all through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. So I thought it'd be good to pray for creative leadership when we're going to talk about creative leadership. So tonight's session is going to be a little bit different because rather than focusing on one particular book, I'm going to focus more generally on the work of Heidi Campbell. I'm going to pull in some things that she does, and I'm going to add a lot of my own stuff as well. So, we'll see how she goes. So I'm going to just put the work of Heidi Campbell in a bit of context. Now, let me say from the start that the other weeks, when we were talking about Walter Brueggemann, we called him Brueggemann and not Walter. We called N.T. Wright, and not N.T. But we're going to be calling Heidi, because I've never called her Campbell, and it just feels weird to me. So I've known Heidi since 2001, so it feels very weird to sort of just refer to her as her last name. So I will be calling her as Heidi, even though that's not normal in sort of academic settings, but hey, what's normal anymore? So yeah, Heidi has a long history of working around looking at questions of churches and people of faith, and different religious traditions in their interactions with media, with new media. So that has been with sort of online. Some of the first research she did, this tells you how long and extensive her research is, were on online email communities. Now I know how many of you are old enough to remember that was some of our first things. It's like when I was in Gander, before I left Gander in 2001. So like we didn't do this kind of thing, but we had online email circles where we used to support one another. So some of our first research were in those kinds of groups, and she has continued this kind of research, looking at both the ways in which religious communities use these media tools, but also how those media tools shape religious communities, but also how religious communities shape those media tools, like that they become what these communities need them to be. And so they sort of enter into a dialectical conversation. Now, like Bergerman and Wright, Heidi comes at this work from a place of deep faith. So while she's not in orders, but I don't think she is. She's not in orders, but she is a person who practices a deep faith. If you sort of Google Heidi, you will see some of that on Facebook. She has, besides her own sort of page, some of you will have seen the many things I repost from Heidi, her Holy Pandemics page, where she's shares she has a whole group of people who share memes and lighthearted things to give us hope during the pandemic. And long before that, she also has a kindness initiative page where she encourages communities into acts of kindness and into embodying faith in that way. So she's a person who comes at this work really through a very faith-filled lens, and I think that's very important for us to keep in mind when we sort of start to think about her work and engage with her work, is that she is quite interested in, as an academic, but also as a person of faith, as to how these things play out. So she has written numerous books, given numerous talks. She is the expert. If you go on YouTube, network theology, religion and media. She's certainly since the pandemic, oh my goodness, how many videos has she posted? She's given talks to the World Council of Churches. She's engaged with a lot of different people. And she sort of has been calling people to task, sometimes in some of her works, in some of her essays, I don't know, in the essays, and I think the one in digital ecclesiology, I'm not sure which one of the new ones she had, she sort of called churches to task that it was obvious that they hadn't read her books. She had done all this work for them to help them, and they hadn't really engaged in it. So one of the things, like some of her earlier works that she looks at sort of what it is that people are looking for. So when people are engaging in digital church or church online, or she's also done work particularly in Orthodox Jewish interactions with media, which is really intriguing. So when people are engaging with new media, engaging things online, there are certain things she says we should be, as church, we should be asking ourselves, and certain things that folk are looking for. So one of the things she says that we need to be saying, and this is similar to what some of our other authors in the last few weeks have said, is what do people need from the church right now? So what is it that people need from the church right now? And how might digital technology be the best used to meet those needs? So what is it that people need, and how might the technology we have best help us to meet those needs. Because I think sometimes we, those of us who are in leadership, sometimes are meeting our own needs or our perceived needs. Sometimes we're playing with new toys, guilty as charged many times. But she says that's really not the approach. And I think a lot of times, and there certainly are a whole group of writers who have really encouraged people to use all the new bells and whistles and in technology, to sort of with the idea that that brings in young people in very much performance based. And Heidi's research would really challenge that kind of notion. And I think there's been several other people, and I can see the book cover, but I can't remember the name, who themselves have sort of said, I wrote that stuff and I was wrong. That's not what people are looking for. So she lists 5, 6 things from her research that people are looking for when they go online. One, most importantly, is they're looking for a sense of relationship. Right? They want some sense of connection. They want some sense of feedback. Right? They don't want to just be consumers. So they don't want to just sit there. They're looking as well for some care. She says they're looking for care, and they're looking for value, to be appreciated. And I think, that's sort of really important to have give and take. And one of the things I've learned, this is not a Heidi thing, this is a Joanne thing now. And I should sort of go, that Joanne thing. So, and this is from some other workshops that I have participated in, not given, around internet use, how important it is to engage with folk, right? So if you are putting something online, so if Robert sort of puts this video online, if someone comments on that, then Robert, I hope is responding to that, right? There is that sort of important, because that's what people are looking for. People are often looking for engagement. They're looking to feel valued, to feel cared for, to feel responded to feel important. And so, those things are important. They're looking for a connection, right? They're looking to be able to connect with people. And they are looking for like a safe place, she says, to be themselves, to be with others who share similar values. So they want sort of an intimacy to that communication. And they also, she says, they long for fellowship. Like I said, so all these things, she says, that they're looking for relationships, for care, for value, for connection, for intimacy, and safety, and for fellowship. And when I think about this, not Joannism, when I think about it, I think about way back in like late 90s, early 2000s, like really way back, because I've been around the block for a while. I remember I had a parishioner when I was in Gander who was a quadriplegic. So he had very little mobility, and so was unable to get out. I mean, you would think late 90s, 2000, we didn't have so much in community vans and all those kinds of things. But he was really, really good with the computer, right? He had a computer, he could do all kinds of things I couldn't do. But that community was his community, right? This is where he could connect with other people who were going through the same thing he was going through. Where he could feel valued and important and didn't feel useless, right? Because so much of what the world around him did made him feel useless, right? Made him feel different, made him feel other. So this community that he was a part of online made him feel valued and worthwhile, that he had something to contribute. He could help people with their computer problems. He had knowledge that they could use. He felt a part. And when I was rereading some of my Heidi stuff, I thought, yeah, like that is a good example of what folk really want from the internet. The other thing that is not a Heidi thing is a Joanne thing, I would say, and this comes out of some of the other research I've done over the years in some of the courses, like some of the ones that myself and Robert and myself and Bishop John have done with Hatchery, that as we begin to sort of navigate our new realities and begin to sort of think about how we reach out to people, When we go back to those first questions, is what people need from the church right now, and how we might best deliver it. I think a lot of us are recognizing um, that we have a lot of subgroups of people, right? So we have some people for whom the digital platforms may be able to provide these things that Heidi lists. But I don't think that these are things that are any different than what most people in our congregations are looking for, right? So people who are normal in-person members of our congregations are looking for these things. And then there are all these folk who are perhaps not normal in-person members of our congregations who are also looking and needing these things. And some of these people do not feel safe in coming to our churches and into those spaces, for all kinds of reasons. So that presents us with some sort of difficult balancing acts, right? That I want us to talk about because I don't have answers to this. But when myself and Bishop John were doing the spiritual entrepreneurship course a couple years ago, continually in our conversations with the other people in the class, this became a question. How do I continue to provide ministry to the people who like what we normally do? And then how do I reach out and give ministry to people who are in need, who need a completely different venue and approach in order to meet their needs? And that's going to be a very difficult task for us, and it's going to take some creativity in leadership. So one of the things that sort of Heidi points out is perhaps a lack of creativity in leadership. Sometimes in her work, is that so especially when we look at the pandemic, she points out that when churches were sort of faced with being pushed to go online into digital areas that they weren't all that comfortable with, she sort of identifies 3 different approaches to how they go about doing this. She calls it either transferring, translating, or transforming. And I think I've done all 3. And so there is no guilt attached to any of this. But so a lot of so like just say I'll take my own stuff I do, for example. So a lot of times it was just transferring. We just put a camera in the front of the church, film what we always did, and put that online. Ding bang, right? Did the exact same thing, no change in it whatsoever. All that was changed was the medium we used for people to receive it. Other people translated it, so they may have done things like slightly differently. They may have had people reading, I've seen ones where they had people like reading from their own homes, right? And they went from home to home to home. But the liturgy was pretty well the same. What is it? She calls it a reading and hymn sandwich. That. But I mean, it was pretty much the same. And then others, what she's felt were more compelling, is what she called translating. And so that's with people who took, sort of looked at what people need, and then sort of thought, well, how do we meet that need? All right, so they need conversation. Well, maybe we'll just sit and have a chat. Maybe like a lot of churches did some check-ins, right? That might be that, or they did a whole different format that wasn't like a worship service at all. So I think so. Like for myself, sometimes I went for a walk and filmed it with my very fancy, dollar store selfie stick, and or like did something that wasn't like anything we normally did, but was able to meet some of their people's needs. And so I mean, those are kinds of things we have to look at. She pushes us to think creatively as to how we might engage with people and what their needs are. What tools do we have available? but she does say that she thinks that, this is no different than how the church has always adjusted to cultural change, right? That regardless of what happened, the church has a long history of adjusting to cultural change, and this is no different. And I think that's really important to note, because when we adjust to cultural change, we don't go back. So many people talk about going back. Um, so um, you know, so I think that that's really important. If we look at this as a cultural change, that needs a creative adjustment, then our approach and our mindset is slightly different. One of the things that has come up in conversations, with some of my friends and colleagues, is like the very difficult task of trying to maintain some of the innovative online things we were doing, now that we're now doing some of the things we're back doing what we were doing before we were shut down, right? So how, like, that's a lot, like, to try to uh, to do. And I know for myself, and I know myself and Robert talked a little bit about this, and I know myself and Juanita have as well. Like, when we started to go back to church, I was like, I don't know if I want to put on robes again. I don't know that I want to fix liturgy again. I don't, like, I had started doing things I had always sort of dreamed of doing, never thought I could, but learned how. And so then, like, so this push and pull. And but again, that goes back to the question I asked earlier, is how do we, continue to meet the needs of folk who have found us in the last few months, and still with folk who really want what they always had and are comforted by that. And that does also, you know, um, meet a need. In Heidi's latest book, looking at the time, in Heidi's latest book, when she talks about digital creatives and the question of authority. Now, I thought this was really interesting. Now, I had to read it really, really quickly because I read it's really, really thick and I really ran out of time. But she talks about the different kinds of digital creatives, and she talks about people who are professionals by day, sort of, and but have a commitment to church, and so they create platforms or they create content. Um, she also talked about people who are spokespeople for churches. So you have some people. I sort of thought about, like, Bishop John, who is who often speaks, or people who, like, some larger dioceses or churches may have people who are official webmasters or folk who work in this area. And then, and then she talked about people who sort of were hybrids of both of those, right? And she uses some new terms that I didn't, kind of fun. She talked about people who are techies for God. So so that was kind of, so again, people who have a lot of technological skills, but were very committed to faith. Um, she talked about internet evangelists as well, but the term I like most, and I have no idea how to even pronounce it, is theoblogians. So instead of theologians, theoblogians. Um, and she said, like, what's happening is that a lot of these folk are operating outside of the normal church structures, right? So especially, I'm going to take the theoblogians as the example. So these are theologians who write blogs, and that's their prime mode of communication. And so instead of being hired by a church seminary or being using recognized church presses or religious presses, these folk are writing blogs and sort of becoming sort of spiritual or faith sort of influencers, right? So people who get a very large number of followers, some of them are picked up on sites like Ninja.net or Patheos or those kinds of things, and this is their living. right? They make their living by doing these things. They write ebooks so that they're cheap and accessible to people. They are doing it directly. They're not going through any of these groups for authority. And it does ask, some really sort of interesting questions. And, really what we're doing here is an example of how digital creatives cause a really interesting question in terms of church authority. So no, like while myself and Robert are priests and so have authority in that way, we have not been asked by a diocese or a academic institution or whatever to create and prepare material for people to learn. Rather, we said, "Hey, this is a great idea. Let's do it." Well, really, Robert said, "This is a great idea," and I said, "Okay." I'll do it with you. And there's all like there are amazing number of things happening all across the world like this, right? People have found that they don't necessarily need to go through the normal structures that they would go through in order to do the kinds of ministry they want to do. So if they want to teach things, hey, I can go on and offer it. Maybe people will sign up. So while myself and Robert are doing this as part of our ministry and our congregations, both of us have taken things from time to time from a group. They have a new name, H&C now, is it, Robert? But Hatchery, whatever. They're a group of theologians.
Oh,
What?
H and Co.
H and Co. Right. So they're a group of theologians, and you see a lot of theologians as well on Patreon, who go out on their own, who collaborate together, who charge fees like you would for a course that you can go and do. They're not doing that under the authority or a direction of any established body, but rather they are doing it themselves. So digital creatives can really bring a question in terms of how religious authority and structures operate. Even I would think for most of us, except there's no bishops on here now, they might hear later, like with our stuff that we have been doing on our online services. A lot of us aren't using the Book of Alternative Services or the Book of Common Prayer. Some of us are using things that are from other Anglican places around the world, which we're allowed to do. Others of us are just trying to find something that speaks into the situation we're living in right now, right? So I'll just say, I'll pick on myself and Juanita, some of the stuff we're doing for Advent, is not coming from any Anglican resource, but it really speaks to the messiness and reality of living in a pandemic. We thought that was important, so that's what we're using. And so, while we may get chastised for it later, we'll see when Bishop John hears this now. But we're using our skills to try to do it. So the kinds of authority under which we normally operate seem to be shifting ever so slightly, right? And we begin to start to create new realities, in terms of not realities like I need medication, but new realities in terms of how we operate. Because I think one of the things about this pandemic is that it's made us recognize that there are all kinds of things that are possible and that we don't necessarily have to work through particular structures. So, I mean, like we're all here, we're not all from one diocese, we're not all from one area, right? We are meeting in ways that transform those things, go beyond those things. Bible studies. I did a Bible study with someone from the Diocese of Nova Scotia. Myself and Robert did something for the Diocese of Montreal. Like the kinds of how we understood ourselves in terms of parishes or deaneries or dioceses or denominations. When we start to deal with digital church, those kind of boundaries don't necessarily exist anymore, right? So the kinds of authorities that determine how you navigate those boundaries now, what are they going to do, right? And myself and Robert had this conversation back earlier on the pandemic, when we were having all kinds of interesting chats around communion, right? Around Eucharist. And people were saying, one article we read that we sort of thought was kind of funny, because they were like, oh, well, but you had people were watching communion services and eating bread and wine at home. And the person was saying, well, like, you can't do that. And I'm like, you can't stop them? Like, if you put something out there and somebody says, I want to engage in this ritual in this way, you can sort of say that's not really right, or that's not the way we church normally understands it. You can't, with digital church, you can't necessarily stop how people engage with the digital church and the digital material, how they might ritualize it, or tell them that they're not getting meaning from it. Like, that kind of authority, I think is being questioned, and being questioned more and more. So I mean, it does present some very interesting questions, and some very questions in terms of how we might engage with authority, how we might be called to new understandings of authority within our church. I mean, do we give authority to somebody who has this particular position because I'm a reverend, or because somebody's a bishop, or do we give authority to people because that's who I like to read, or like, these are very interesting questions as we move into the digital kind of age. So those are a few things. I'm trying to be very conscious of time that that Heidi talks about and that I think are interesting. I don't know what you want to add, Robert.
Well, I didn't want to say too much because I did really want to I wanted to hear from other people. And in particular, I was really interested to hear this evening from lay people about their vision of creative leadership within the church. But I did, when you started off talking about community at the beginning there, my mind went to two examples from my own home. One that's what I would call a low-tech form of community, and it has to do with my wife. And the other one is, I guess we would call it a high-tech form of community, and it has to do with my youngest daughter, Haley. So for the low-tech community, it's the community that my wife, Lori, has formed over the last couple of years as a runner. She's made a whole new group of friends, and some of them very deep friendships, and the community that comes from that. So they'll go for a run, and then afterwards they'll go for a coffee or go to the pub and have a beer, or and they get together outside of running, like to have lunch. And this community was formed around this thing that they shared in common, which was running. And I think there's something to be learned there from the church. And the other example, which has to do with my daughter Haley, and is a high-tech community, is I'm always amazed at how much of her life she lives online. And the communities that she's a part of, she's not a part of just one community. There's many different online communities that she's a part of. She's a part of like a shopping community, almost like a clothing exchange community. And this happens on Instagram, where they just post pictures of clothing that they have that they maybe don't want to wear anymore. And then somebody else, wants it, and they kind of swap clothing that way. It's fascinating and environmentally friendly. Art, she has artists that she follows, painters, sculptors. I don't know who they are, and they're all kind of local and very kind of low key, but like they purchase art from each other online. And food. She hardly ever goes to a restaurant, but Skip the Dishes and DoorDash is the way that she now experiences food from around the city, from all kinds of different cultures and backgrounds. I'm just amazed at how, only that's just two generations there of how one is still forming community through being in personal touch with people around a common held activity, but then you've got this other multiplicity of communities centered around technology and different forms of social media. And I just think, there's so many different ways to be community now. And in the church, sometimes we're so stuck on that one traditional format of being community. And I think we just have to be open to experiencing these other forms of community. I made some other notes there, but I don't know if I want to say too much about it, because I really did want to hear what other people had to say, and maybe some points will come up that I'll speak up about.
Yeah, and that's very similar to what some of the folk, like I said, back when it was Hatchery LA, they had a whole movement in California where they encourage, it was at one of the theological seminaries, I don't remember now, which one, but they called them common cause communities. So like they sort of said, instead of like looking at long-term churches with a building, and it's going to be here for 100 years, forming a community around a certain cause, and to achieve a certain end, and bringing people together, and to worship and to learn and to grow and to do. Right? That sort of almost Benedictine kind of notion, but in a much more short-term kind of idea. But yes, I mean, the fact is that we gather around common causes, and the church is really no different than that. It's a common cause community.
Yeah, and I wanted to reaffirm what you were saying towards the end about, you didn't say this, but like the idea that
But I meant it.
but there's no rules anymore. We can do whatever we feel God is calling us to do in response to the particular needs of the community. I just had this conversation the other day with our choir director, Rosalind Bartlett, who was here tonight, and we were talking about, carol service and stuff. And I said, well, why don't we just do it on Sunday morning? Like, it's COVID now, we can do whatever we want. Like, why does it have to be in the evening? We can just do it, if. So I think there's something very liberating about that, right?
And I think particularly, if we follow Heidi's advice in terms of beginning, instead of with the tradition and the authority and what we should do, with the community and what is it they need, and then moving from there.
And it's not to negate the tradition or the authority.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
No.
Because I know somebody.
It's never an either or.
I know somebody's going to say, well, then it's just chaos and everything goes. No, I think it's giving a more of an equal footing to the tradition and the authority and the community, the needs and experience of the community. Whereas before we were kind of out of balance. Now I think we're being drawn more into balance with those two things, right? I think the tradition can inform the needs of the community.
And the community always dictates the limits of tradition, it always has, at this point, you're outside of the tradition, you're outside of the community,
Especially in the Anglican tradition, right? Because we've always held all this stuff in tension. Barbara Miles is saying something there.
Okay.
In my case, the chance to participate in this series of sessions and Robert's Friday check-ins were a very different thing to be a part of, and they have opened me up to others. I agree that I felt the need of connection early on in COVID, but now I'm looking for ways to participate with others. Beautiful. Thank you. And I think, Barb, that's been the experience of a lot of people, right? COVID opened up something in them. They made a connection, like Joanne was saying, and now they're looking to go deeper, like to have more of a connection. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, actually, and it's sort of kind of cool because the first question I asked was like, what's been your experience of the digital church, during this COVID? Has it been mostly, what has met your needs? Has it been sort of like, she used the terms transferring or translating or transforming? What has met your needs? What have you found most helpful? Not everyone at once.
And just remind people, you can type your comments in the chat function, or you can, turn on your microphone or wave at us, and then we'll know that you want to say something.
I picked up a little bit on the phrase cultural change.
Mhm.
I think when this ends and we're looking back on it, our views of it, I mean, hindsight is a great thing. You look back 6 months or a year from now and say, well, what have we learned? And what did I do during it? And was what I did wrong or was it right? And you'll probably have a different view, which unfortunately we don't have the benefit of knowing now, or we might change our behavior or we might not. I guess the point I was trying to make, and Reverend Robert addressed it there a few minutes ago, is the traditional part. You know, if we've been a little bit out of balance on the traditional side, and now this will enable us to get back more in balance, I think probably in theory that's good, but you very seldom reach an equilibrium point. What usually happens is the pendulum is either this way and then goes all the way back the other way. And the chances of it dropping where it should drop are relatively slim. So my concern would be that in trying to deal now with that issue and get that pendulum to swing a little bit is stopping it, and that we don't end up with some kind of a gong show, which I think would be pretty sad in the end, because I don't think any of us really want that.
But I would think too, Wayne, is one of the wonderful things about the, as my nephew calls it, the interwebs, yeah, is people's ability to monitor that, self-monitor that, and monitor that people won't participate. I think once it gets to that level of complete chaos, or gong show is a good as good analogy as anything. I think people will go, this no longer meets a need, and they will withdraw. And because I mean, I do think it's balance. I know for myself that like what we do, just say online, like there are times when folk, we need to do a service filmed in the church, people in robes, and people need to see one another. And there is something very comforting in the familiar. And so you need a balance of it all. And I think when we don't do that, I think people will walk with their feet or with their mice. I guess in this hand, right? I hope they do, and give us that that very immediate feedback, right?
I hope what you're saying turns out to be correct, because if it is, then that's great. I think we will all have gone through an experience and learned by it.
Mm.
But when I see people and the way they act over a simple thing like a mask and whether or not to wear it, and then rackets with people, anti-mask protests and all this kind of thing, I got to say, I'm not too encouraged by it all.
No, but you do see people respond to it, and sort of it's a very limited number. Some of that is the amount of attention media give to it, but that's a whole other conversation on media literacy. But just yeah.
And I think too, to go back to what I was saying, I know not everybody who's been participating is from the Anglican tradition, but what I've always appreciated about the Anglican tradition is kind of the broad expression of what it means to be Anglican, that you can be low church evangelical, you can be high church Anglo-Catholic, and pretty much everything in between, and still we can come together and pray. And there's something really beautiful about that. And I just think about like the expressions that we have here, even at St. Mark's. So like you come to church here on Saturday and we don't wear vestments, it's just street clothes, more of a conversational style. The music is more guitars and, contemporary, although I don't even like using that word, eclectic. The music is more eclectic, but it's still rooted in the tradition. We're still gathered around the table. We're still breaking open the scriptures to learn from them. It's still rooted in something. But then you come on Sunday and it's more of the traditional, the choirs in robes. We're singing more of the traditional hymns. The sermon is often more traditional, and like it's just one person speaking to the congregation, still rooted in the same tradition, but just expressed in two different ways. And I think there's a lot of room for that. But again, I know the fear too is that devolving into a gong show. I like that terminology, but I agree with Joanne. I think when it's become so unfamiliar, it will just become meaningless, and people will just say, well, that doesn't meet my needs, right? And they will want the familiar structure of liturgy.
I mean, that's the thing in terms of liturgy, is that it's thousands of years old, and in various faith traditions have various forms of it. But again, it is ritual is significant, and ritual has to be done well. If ritual isn't done well, like I said, it will not do what it's supposed to do. And so I think we can put different language to it, and we can use different media for it. But some of the root and needs to stay the same, or else it will lose some of its meaning. Other things that people have experienced that they found particularly helpful during this time?
I have to say that I enjoyed, I don't know, enjoyed, it's a strong word, but I kind of liked, no, let me start again. Since we've come back into the building and like gathering for worship, I have to be completely honest, I have not enjoyed it, because it's so unfamiliar and so unlike what we know to be church. At least when we were online, it was different, but we had no experience of it before. Like it was new. Now we're back in a familiar place, but nothing is familiar, and it just feels odd to me. Like I can't touch anyone, we can't sing, communion is different. Like it to me, it's not, I was getting more out of the online worship than I am in some sense. And it's different when I'm leading it too, right? Because I'm an extrovert and I feed off of a crowd. And so not being able to be present with the crowd like I used to, it's just, to me, it's just weird. And I see Allison Billard said, I don't like it either. I don't know if she wants to chime in a bit more and explain what it is that she doesn't like about it.
So, and I've said this, I think, in every forum where we've met, Robert. I mean, I don't, to be perfectly honest, we didn't watch a whole lot of the online church either. Small children on Sunday mornings around the breakfast table, we'd catch a little bit of it once in a while. But I struggle now, and I'm an introvert. So unlike yourself, I don't actually love crowds, and I don't really want people touching me and all those kinds of things. But church was the one place where that wasn't necessarily true. And there, I want to give someone a hug, and I want to reach out and touch them, and I can't do that. And so while, I have found lots of things about the online world that I appreciate more now than I did before COVID, I have to say, going back to the building was not what I expected. And I don't ever want to go, because I don't find it fulfilling or satisfying the way that it used to be. And I don't really know what to do about that. I just hope that, I guess, eventually we get to go back to something more like what we had. But I don't really know if that's a reality in any aspect of our post-COVID world. So maybe I'm just naive in that one. But yeah, I don't really like it either.
But Alison, what's kind of filled the gap for me a little bit is stuff like this, where you can meet and chat with people in a digital format. Like, so we've done this one, and before in the spring, I did one on Rachel Held Evans' book through Zoom, and it was really interesting to see the community forming over a number of weeks. And I like that kind of filled the gap for me a little bit, to do different stuff like what we're doing here now. But still not the same, but.
No, and I found that to be true in like other aspects. I guess I haven't really connected with the whole church side of things online as well as I have in other areas. But I can absolutely see how that's true. I know I don't put my camera on because normally I'm very casually dressed. But you know, I like to come and listen and hear what other people have to say, and it's, you know, it's nice to just hear other voices that are not, you know, sort of outside of my family and outside of my job. So it's I can see how that would be, you know, satisfying.
I mean, I think one of the things too for me is having conversation partners that are different. So rather than having a book study that includes, you know, the people who normally come to my book studies, there are all kinds of new people. Like when I did one this spring, we had people from, you know, from right from like just outside St. John's right to BC, and you know, like there were conversation partners that were, yeah, so it was very interesting. So sometimes you have to be careful not to pretend it's normal or pretend it's the same as what we were doing before. And I think that's sort of the thing about church sometimes, is it almost feels like we're youngsters playing copy. Right, like it's like we're pretending it's like this, but it's really not like that. I don't know, but yes, I don't know. I don't have words to really describe it.
So I just wanted to read what Barb Miles has posted here again. I'm relying more on the other parts of my faith, such as attending the women's friendship group and baking muffins for East Point Elementary breakfast program. I am able to be part of the community and live my faith besides attending church in the building. Really good point. Yeah, we are in the, I think one of the things that COVID has exposed is just how event-based we are. Like we assume, we associate the church so much with what the church does in the building, right? That I think COVID has kind of shaken us a little bit to remind us, like what Barb is saying, we're the church when we're baking muffins. We're the church when we're knitting masks for friends. We're the church, you know, when we're doing these different kinds of activities too. It's not just a church that gets together in a building for a Bible study or for church itself. Like, I mean, it's open up our understanding of what the church could be.
So one of the other questions I have for you is that if you have seen, or if you can identify a rise in creativity in church leadership or outside of the official church during this pandemic. So, you know, Heidi talks about digital creatives, people who are doing things in very different kinds of ways. So in what places, either within the traditional structures of the church or outside of those structures, have you, what kinds of things have been particularly creative, you thought? Things you hadn't expected or hadn't experienced before?
I just wanted to make sure his comment doesn't go unnoticed, but Wayne said, I think in connection with the previous question, but could apply to this one too.
Yeah.
Church is now a hybrid, evolving still. We are in transition.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think the difficulty with all this is we're in transition. And as church, we like to know where we're going and what the end's going to be, and we don't. I mean, we know what the end is going to be. You know, we know, you know, that we're moving more into the reign of Christ, but the insecurity of what this hybrid means, I think, is has been stressful for a lot of us. It's exciting, but
I
stressful.
think Wayne wanted to say something, and then maybe.
No, I was just going to say, for me, life hasn't changed too much in terms of church, other than sitting in front of a computer on a Sunday morning instead of sitting in a church pew on a Sunday morning. I go to church every Sunday morning, and like I always did, but now with granted it's a little different. But I guess my fear is that if we start saying now that, well, this is not so bad, I don't personally like it, to be honest with you, but other people love it, and that's fine. But if we go back to a church in the church building now and look around, I don't think I'd like that either, to be honest with you. I haven't been in a church building since I got in front of the computer. But I think that's an unfair comparison. I think what we have to compare it with is when this is all over, where are we at that point? And then we go back to church. We should be comparing the church as it was before this whole thing started, rather than what it's like now with a bunch of people wearing masks and sitting 8-10 feet away from each other. I don't think I would like that very much at all.
I think Roz Bartlett was going to say something.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to talk about my experience as a choir director, as a leader, I guess, in the church, because as choir director, I feel responsible for more than the music. I feel a responsibility for trying to keep this spiritual family of the choir connected with each other. And so what we've done, as you know, Robert, is we started Zoom meetings. I hadn't even heard of Zoom before COVID-19. I didn't have a clue what it was. I still don't have much of a clue, and I don't host it. Thank goodness one of my choir members hosts it. But we were getting together on Zoom. At the beginning of COVID, we were getting together every week, which was good for some of the choir members, but I still have a concern for those who don't have the technical know-how, or are nervous about giving out personal information. I have one choir member that has not been on Zoom with us because she's afraid of giving any personal information online. So she's not getting that connection. And some of the other older members aren't always getting that connection because they don't have the know-how, the technological know-how that's necessary. So that's still a concern of mine in this digital age that we're developing, or whatever that we're going through, is that as much as I'm trying to be creative, or as other choir members are helping out and being creative, and we had one choir member this summer that she's very good, as Robert knows, in coming up with creative ideas, and she had small groups of the choir meet in her garden over the summer. So like she'd have a half a dozen choir members, and we try to pick members that we knew were fairly close to each other, and we would get together with them in her garden over the summer, just to try to make that personal connection that is so important. Joanne, as you said, that Heidi said, and when you started reading that at the beginning, the first thing before you said it, I was thinking connection is, to me, the most important thing that we have to be concerned about with people. So I'm still worried about how to connect those that are outside the digital world.
And I mean, I think you bring out a couple interesting points, Jocelyn. One is for folks to recognize that some of the ministries that we do in church are as much about connection and relationship as they are about doing the ministries that we're doing, right? Like the choir. I know a friend of mine who has a teenager who's in a choir was amazed how those choir members met all during COVID, even though they couldn't sing. They met on Zoom or whatever. So there is something far more important going on than we sometimes address. But you do, there are a couple things in what you talk about, is the both and, like how do we maintain some online digital community and some in-person community? How do we deal with the digital divide, which is real, right? And a lot of folk have been doing phone, some of the people have doing phone things, and have connected that way. I know our parish has just gotten a very large grant, so we're going to be buying iPads and tablets for people who don't have them, so that we're anticipating that we will probably be locked down again in the winter, and so that they will be able to stay connected at least somehow. But they won't give them if they're afraid, they're not going to give them interaction. But yes, like it's how do we do both and how do we meet low tech how do we find low tech and high tech solutions? Because sometimes, we get so so excited about the high tech solutions. Like, so when we first went online in our church, we did audio. We didn't do video because we talked to folk and a lot of them weren't really comfortable with video and stuff. And so we did SoundCloud. They could all get it on their phones. Or what we did is we had audio, and I don't have my phone for me. I would get on my phone and on my cell phone. I phoned two people. I put the phones in front of the speaker, and there'd be 4 or 5 of us, worshiping together via the phone over the line. So it wasn't, again, but it was very low tech and it worked. So part of, when chatting about like what do people need, what do the people need right now is knowing who your people are. And not everybody needs a digital solution.
I was listening with interest to what Rosalind was saying. I agree with everything she said. And I noted when your Reverend Joanne was talking about the points in the book, and I came across this word connection. And the first thing I thought about, well, yes, that's an important point, because a lot of people are not feeling a connection. In fact, it's the exact opposite. They're feeling detached, and they're wandering around. They can't just get into this kind of stuff. And I think it's more than just the technical capability. I'll just make this point and I'll stop talking. I feel like I'm talking too much. I think it's more than the technological point, because just the other day, as an example, one of the people from St. Mark's dropped off a bunch of envelopes, Advent envelopes, which we are now distributing, which I got a bunch I got to drop off too. And I hadn't seen this person for quite a while. And now that's a connection that I always had when we were going to church the old-fashioned way, you might say. You go into church in the morning, you have a chat, didn't have anything to do with church necessarily, but it's a chance to connect with a fellow parishioner. And I think that's a big void that probably we're not recognizing how important it is. And it's easy to blame it on the computer, and that kind of stuff. That's part of it. But I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah, Wayne, I agree. And I've experienced here at the office sometimes now when people, they're calling in for something that before COVID, it would only take a couple of minutes. Maybe they're calling to upgrade, update us on a new credit card number, or they're calling to ask a question about something, a couple minutes on the phone normally. Now it's a 20-minute, half-hour conversation, because you don't get a chance to talk to people. And I know first when we reopened here for public worship, I would do the dismissal, and then I would just start tidying up from communion. Whereas normally I would be out at the door talking to people. And a lot of times that's the only chance I got to chat with anybody. And after a few weeks, it just felt so odd not to be doing that I said, I don't care, COVID or no COVID. So now I do the dismissal and I put on my mask and I go out and stand outside, and even just to look someone in the eye and say, good morning, have a nice day, or how are you doing? Just to have a little chat that way is a connection again.
Yeah, because we're social animals, basically.
Yeah, we are. And the other thing I was going to say to pick up on what you're saying is, and I think we might have talked about this last week, but the idea that we're in the middle, and even before COVID came along, an epidemic of loneliness. People feel cut off from each other. They don't have the connections to community that we had generations ago. And it's not just, it's among seniors, it's among millennials, people in their 20s. They don't have community. Yeah, they got some connections on their phone, but they don't have a very wide, selection of friends, right? I was reading a fascinating study a couple of months ago, and was talking about how millennials are having way less sex than their parents and grandparents. And it's because so much of their life is online. They don't have that human contact. So like pregnancy rates and all that kind of stuff is all going down because we don't they don't connect that way anymore. And so there's a real, opportunity, I think, for the church to be able to, when we can, connect with people, right? So the questions that Joanne asked at the beginning, I think, are super important questions. What do people need from the church right now? And how might digital technology help us to do that? I think those are really important questions that we got to struggle with. And there's no easy answers, and it's not going to look the same for any two faith communities.
And some of the answers might be digital technology is not going to help us with that one.
Yeah.
Right. And I think like there's some of us have this sort of assumption that soon we will see this person soon, and so that we have lost sort of, we don't sort of reach out because we think soon we're going to be back to that. So in circles of phone calls, like some of us were doing this spring, some of those things to reconnect with folk, are going to become super important, right? May become very important. Some very low tech or non-tech things, dropping things off at people's doors, things like that may become a bit more important. Like, how do we make connections? How do we have people feel that they're cared for? What helps people feel cared for? These are, so, and it depends a lot on who your folk are, right? So again, if you're the people in your church community, because then again, like we're talking about, who are the people in your neighborhood? Sorry, I didn't mean to break out in song. But one of the things about this, this sort of going online, is that the people who I would think are in my community, that sort of notion has been really challenged, right? Because usually we tend, this is like guilty. I don't know if Robert would have the same, we sort of think of the people in our community as the people belong to our parish, right? They live in a certain geographical area, or they gives envelopes, right? Or their mother gives envelopes, or their father, like there's a connection, right? So now we have people texting, communicating with us, from responding to some of our online things, who don't give envelopes, who don't live near, who are not in any traditional kind of way, members of our congregations, but they are now members of our congregations. I said to folk when we first started, I said to some of my clergy friends, I said, you understand that every single one of us now has another congregation in our parish, right? We've all added another congregation, because, and I get texts and messages and sometimes calls for help from people who don't live nearby and who don't otherwise have a connection here, but somehow in some way made a connection to what we're doing online. There usually is a connection. Sometimes they watch because a friend of theirs watches, or a friend of theirs was reading, or something like that. But it is like that, how do we foster and maintain the depths of those connections when some of them are quite different than what we've been used to dealing with in our ministries up until this point, right?
Well, I mentioned dropping off envelopes. It would probably take me maybe, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes when church was like it was, and I'd be finished. Well, it's probably going to take me 2 hours now to finish this, because I'm going to be talking to them, which is not a bad thing,
Nope.
Even from 10 feet away. But it's the first time I would have had an opportunity to see people who I would normally see from Sunday to Sunday. And that's a big change.
Yeah.
It is. And then the question becomes, like, how do we maintain that? Like, how do we maintain connections? Do we need to make parish buddies? Do we, again, this is where our creativity has to come in mind. Okay, we're not seeing one another after church, having coffee or standing at the door or whatever. Okay, we still need connection. How are we going to do that? What that's going to look like? And I don't have an answer to that. I'd be happy for any, But I do think those are questions that are well worth our time and effort to ask. Because myself and Robert or Juanita or Gerald or whatever other clergy, Neil, Beverly, like we can't be at that 24/7.
Yeah, that plays into something that Barb just said here in the chat. Sometimes a phone call can mean the world to an isolated person. I remember my mom expressing how sad she felt when she was ill and couldn't attend church and no one called her. She says, I'm not suggesting that priests should be calling everyone, but perhaps more of us could be doing it. And Barb, I think that's really another thing that COVID has awakened us to, is that it can't be just the person who's paid to do ministry. And so here at St. Mark's, I've made very few phone calls during COVID, only to people who are in like the biggest need. So, they've been really sick or lost a loved one during COVID, like I'll make contact with those people. But we have divided up the parish list into 7 or 8 people, and they're calling, I don't know, 30 or 40 names that are on a list to just say, hi, calling from St. Mark's. We're just wondering how you're doing, hoping you're okay. If there's anything that you need, especially early on when things were shut down, if you need help getting groceries or anything, just let us know and we can get you connected with someone. And people really appreciated that. I mean, it's a bit of work for someone to do it. And we did have some people who did it once and then the next go around said, oh, I'd rather step back and let someone else have a turn. But that's fine too. The more people who get involved, I think the better. Right? I think one of the things around creative leadership is just recognizing that we're all leaders in some way. We all have a ministry to do. So whether it's picking up the phone to somebody, or whether it's like Wayne is talking about dropping off a church envelope to someone, it's all, it's all ministry, right?
And that sort of leads to one of the other questions that I know I've been struggling with myself, is like how really are we going to be able to continue to do this? How are we going to be able to continue to provide ministry to these new people who we have reached by some of our new formats and doing church, our new these kinds of things that we're doing right now, and maintaining all of the traditional ministry we have been doing as church, because we only have so many volunteers, and volunteers, that's the right word, I guess. We have only so many committed members to do ministries. And I know that in conversations with like some folks are finding it, some of us in ordained ministry are finding it very difficult to like we sort of, when COVID started and the churches we stopped in building worship and we went online, then we developed a whole new rhythm of life, a whole new set of tasks to do and things like that. And then, churches reopened. So then we had all the, it's like you're doing 2 jobs at one time, right? And people are burning out, and people's mental health, is a concern. And so how do we do both? Because I don't think we can not do both. It has to be, both have to be done, whether it's new creative ways to imagine how we engage people in leadership and how we pay for some of these things. But it is an interesting question, right? That how do we reach out to folk, for whom these new models of church are really working, and encourage them and help them have that connection that they're longing for, and stay connected to people for whom that is just not going to work. Answer me, please, quickly. I need some help before it goes on holidays tomorrow.
I mean, I think we're still feeling our way through this, and time will tell, I think, how we deal with this, how we, because I always get nervous anytime I go to, a church meeting, anything about talking about the future, and someone says, well, we need to be doing this A, B, or C. And what I always hear is, you got to keep doing everything that you're already doing, but now we want you to do these other things too. And I kind of panic a little bit because I think I'm feeling kind of swamped already. And now you want me to do this other stuff, right? But it doesn't just apply to me, who is a priest in the church, but I can imagine lay people hear the same thing, right? So you want me to, I got to be on the altar guild and keep that going. I got to be serving tea and coffee after church, and you want me to keep that going. And, you want me to do all the fundraisers that we got to do to pay the bills to keep everything going. And now you want me to do this other thing, get outside of the
Call
church,
20 people.
right? So, I mean, yeah, I have no easy answers for it either. Like, I really don't know. Like, do we let go of some of the things that we've done to embrace some of these new things? Then somebody
This is Jane speaking. I still do virtuals every week, but I don't do them from the church. I do them online on Tuesday mornings. I go and do them. I post them on Sunday mornings. And it's basically a different service than I would do in church. And when we started our church opening, I said, I'm going to slack back on those. Now I'm not going to do it. But just to mention it, there are so many people have said, oh, but I'm not ready to come back to church. I really like getting up on Sunday morning and watching your service with my cup of coffee. I really don't want to come back to church yet. And like, even now, I think this week there was 682 views as well as 80 odd in church. So what do? I mean, I sort of like to give it up sometimes because it's getting to be a lot of work, because it's, like I say, it's two different services. I usually do Holy Eucharist and probably Holy Baptisms, and I'm doing private baptisms, but you're trying to be everything you need to be to everybody, and sometimes it burns you out.
sometimes.
But you got to keep maintaining. But I find to do a virtual on Tuesday mornings and have it done. Like, I'm ready now for the one for December the 6th on Tuesday morning, because I got it all planned, done. And it's just a lot of singing and some Bible readings of the day and some extra little different things. But it's just something to stay connected to the ones that, when I said, well, you can come to church now. And they said, no, I'd rather stay home. I'm happy home. Okay.
So Jane, are you doing it just by yourself, or are there other people with you?
I have 2 lay ministers, and I have each week I have one lay minister come with me, and we have a band at St. James where there's 5 people was in the band. Excuse me. So one week I have one member who comes in and plays along when we sing. Excuse me. And the next week is the following week. Every one of them will come in. There's 4 now that comes in probably once a month. So don't make them too bored. And it gives me a little different kinds of music. Some of them sing, some of them don't. But I enjoy doing the virtuals more so than the, well, I get a tickle in my throat. I like my church services, but like you said, you're so restricted. You can't, I do come down the back, and I've got seniors who comes out and says, I want to hug you. And I says, well, hit my elbow or hit me upside the head, but don't hug me. You're not allowed. But like, that hurts me to know that I can't hug those people. And to go to the senior homes, you've got to keep your distance. You're not allowed to do this. So with the virtual, the senior homes puts them on Sunday afternoons, and they watch them, but I still manage to get up once a month. But like, to keep connection in this age of COVID means work. And it's like, you got to do it. You really got to do it, because you're bringing more people to Jesus than you really realize.
And Jane, do you think after the age of COVID, do you think you'll still be doing those online services?
I probably will, because I got a lot of people that lives up, let's say, I don't know if you're familiar with this West Coast, but like say in McDougall's area, they don't drive down to church, because that's about what, 25-minute drive, I guess. So an hour services is 10 a.m. They may come on Christmas Eve for Sunday, but they like watching them from them there too. Like, if it gets to the point that it's not wanting to be watched, I will probably give it up. But even if 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name.
But Jane, is it possible that that ministry that you're doing, could that become, say, a deanery ministry that could be shared so that,
I'm thinking like, well, Ken and Jeff Pitton, he still does a few services online. And like now we had a ministerial meeting, and we're all going to get together at different churches and do a nativity scene, a drive-through nativity scene on December the 19th. So all the churches can take part into that so that we can raise some funds for our Christmas hampers, like with the Salvation Army and the Pentecost and the Catholics, the Uniteds, the Anglicans, like all of us. So like our churches out here is thriving in a sense they've never thrived before. Now, I love that. I'm not very computer, as you can see. I got a hard job to even get on it sometimes. Tonight was very hectic. Thank you, Kay Osmond. But I really do like doing things and the virtuals. I always said, I'm not doing virtuals. I'm not getting on that thing and singing. Forget it. It's not happening. And Kay have heard me say it. A lot of people have. And yet I started from day one and I haven't put it up.
Never say never.
No.
Jane, for me, like, I've recognized early on, you can't do everything.
No.
You got to focus on what you're good at, but also the things that give you some joy and some energy, right?
Yeah.
So for me to get online, whether it's on Facebook Live or through Zoom or anything, to do things like the daily office is just not who I am, and it wouldn't bring me any sense of, joy or anything. So I haven't done anything like that, but I've been directing people to other people that I know are doing it. So like here in St. John's, Nancy March, who's normally here this evening, but it's her birthday tonight, so she's thankfully not here. So she does, throughout the week, several different forms of the daily office. Jonathan Rowe at St. Michael's does benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. And I mean, if that's what you're into, I direct people to that. The cathedral down there is doing the daily office. So, I mean, I'm directing people. So I focus on the things that I'm good at, that I like to do. So stuff like this,
Yeah,
I can do, to get on a Facebook Live and talk for a half hour about some piece of scripture or some theological idea. I can do that, right? Not everybody can. I think just need to get into a better sense of partnership in the church, not be so darn territorial about, okay, St. Mark's we got to do all this stuff, and you got to do all that stuff, and Kay's got to do all this other stuff. Why can't we just focus on what we're good at and then share that with other people? So you're doing this virtual.
Yeah, I don't do daily offices. This is just a virtual that comes on Sunday mornings. Like last Sunday morning, we had a hymn sing at our church for the Reign of Christ Sunday and all that. On the virtual, we sang songs and sang hymns and that, the same as if we were going to do it. But we done them Tuesday morning, and a musician came in and we played. It's fun. It's actually fun to do it on Tuesday. You're not under pressure. There's a click a button and start over, and we've done that. So it's not something that you're pushed to do. So I like that way more so than I like getting. I do know out here that Bishop John, I've heard him say that they may put internet in churches and set us up with cameras. I mean, I will have to do it if it's told me to do, but I'd rather do my Tuesday morning virtuals where if it don't come out right, I can click the button and start over.
But Jane, you just used the word that very few people are using in connection with the church right now. You use the word fun.
It is fun. And I love church. I really do. I love singing. I love all that I do about the church. Yeah. Sometimes I get a little bit antsy with all those classes online since we're doing our SPIP, but other than that, when I'm not so busy, I really do. And when Kay Osmond was out here, I mean, we spent hours on top of hours just singing and having fun. That's what it's about, fun.
Keep doing that. Keep finding ways to have fun.
Yeah, we do have fun.
I just wanted to draw attention. Gloria Wendover saying, working together is what we need more of. Different people, different gifts.
Yeah.
So Joanne, we're running out of time. I don't know if anything you wanted to get to before.
No, I mean, I abandoned my questions for everyone else's questions a long while ago, and that was it's all good. I mean, before we end, I want to sort of thank everyone for these 4 weeks. It's been, again, an experiment to sort of say, when we think outside the box, if we think creatively, we can do far more than we can ask or imagine, as the doxology says. I do have a poem.
Yay, good. To keep the trend going.
But, you know, when everyone, I get to know if anyone else want to say anything. I don't know if it really fits, but I felt desperate need that I had to find a poem. All right, we're ready for the poem. So, you know, when I'm in doubt and I need a poem, I always go to Mary Oliver. She's sort of my go-to. And this is one of my favorites. It's called The Summer Day. I know it's not summer here, but, you know, pretend you're in Australia and it's summer. Okay. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down? Who is gazing around her enormous and complicated eyes? Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Good question to think on.
Yeah, that's good. Can't go wrong with Mary Oliver.
You can never go wrong with Mary Oliver. I have audiobooks of her reading her own poetry. So when I get really stressed, don't recommend it when you're driving. But when you get really stressed, it's very relaxing.
Yeah, I wanted to echo what Joanne said too about thanking everyone for being part of this. You know, I have crazy ideas sometimes, and then always amazed that people are willing to go along with me. I carry out those ideas, and it's been, to quote Jane, it's been fun. I've had fun over the last 4 weeks. I went home last week and my wife said, how did your thing go tonight? And I said, I'm having a lot of fun. And, you know, just getting together and talking about some of this stuff. From the beginning, Joanne and I did not want this to be a how-to, to tell you how to do church or be church, because we have no friggin' idea.
We got no idea at all.
We don't know what we're doing. But
Shh, don't tell our bishops.
But I think we all are asking the same questions, and we're all having the same struggles. And that if to have venues like this where we can come together to struggle with those questions, or maybe give each other some new questions, some new things to think about, I think that's always a very blessed and precious thing, and it's a gift. And so thank you all for taking time out of your, what I know is very busy and complicated schedules to be with us. We really appreciate it. And on that note, thus ends Church in the Age of COVID.
Go have a blessed Advent. I think we need a little Advent now. I think my new hymn is not, we need a little Christmas. I think we need a little Advent.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much too. Wonderful.
Good night.
Thanks.
Bye.